Welcome, everybody, to the Mind Your Money podcast, a show by public.com that examines the relationship between investing, human behavior, and happiness. I'm Doug Boneparth, president of Bonafide Wealth.
I'm Morgan Housel. I'm a partner at the Collaborative Fund. Today, we're going to be talking about the perils of trying to get rich quick and how sometimes the fastest way to get rich is to go slow. We're also going to be talking about the dopamine cycle and the increasing connection between money and mental health. Later in the show, we're going to be talking to Kevin Kelly. He's the former executive editor of Wired Magazine, and he wrote an incredible book called Excellent Advice for Living. I've read it. It's incredible. We're going to be talking to him about his latest book. Doug, I had this idea a couple weeks ago that I wrote about recently, which is that the fastest way to get rich is to go slow. Like the irony of that. But I think if you look over time, how true I think that is. That I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that most financial problems come from people not making the wrong decision. It's people making the right decision, but trying to speed it up, trying to go too fast. And it's true in investing. It's true in personal finance. Like everyone just has this idea of like, how can I get that, but not have to be patient, not have to wait for it? And I think the cost of almost everything that's great with money in investing, in personal, whatever it is you got to wait. That's the cost of admission. You have to be patient. And when you try to compress that time, that's where all the problems come from. And that's why like the fastest way, like the most efficient way to get rich is to go slowly. That seemed true to me. I'm curious what your take is.
Yeah, so I view this like from an entrepreneurial setting. I love the expression, I'm a 15-year overnight success story, right? The joke that anyone that is showing a great deal of success actually did it by playing a long game very, very well. In my experience, it's your ability to play those long games, which is very uncomfortable for most people. I also think we're just programmed, with our ancient DNA of learning how to survive the day to day. Like you literally, went out, hunted, hoped an animal didn't kill you and got to play the game again. So kind of hard coded in us is this notion of trying to get things done as quickly as possible. And the discomfort that comes with, all right, well, I'm going to go play this game and it's going to take me 10 years to do it. I guess the most frequent expression is Rome wasn't built in a day. And, as trite as these expressions are, they just keep coming up. And yes, it's very true with investing, as you pointed out. But from my perspective, I live that in building business, I think is really where you see it. All the greatest companies of the world weren't shoved through the pipe of growth. It started out very slow with a lot of doubt and a lot of opportunity for failure before there was any kind of mainstream success.
I read this quote recently from the biographer of Johnny Carson. And the biographer said that Johnny Carson would never take praise seriously. If somebody said, Johnny, you're so funny, you're so successful, you're so good, he would like wave it off because he knew how much hard work and blood, sweat, and tears went into that the praise just kind of landed flat because it's like, I'm not naturally funny. I'm not naturally talented. I worked my ass off to get this. Yeah. And therefore, he didn't really take the praise that seriously. I thought that was really true. And it's true for anyone who you admire their success that you don't see what went into it. You don't see how patient they were. You don't see the years of anxiety and despair. You generally only see the finished product. Yeah. And I think that's so true in investing as well. But I think it's completely natural to say, how can I get that reward just faster? Just give it to me now. I understand where that comes from. And it's a completely normal, natural emotion. I just don't think there's really any good examples of how you can speed that process up in an efficient way. I mean, I wrote in my book that 99% of Warren Buffett's net worth was accumulated after his 60th birthday, which the big takeaway from that is Warren Buffett a great investor? Like, yes, of course he is. Of course he's a good investor. Yeah. But the whole secret, literally 99% of his success is that he's been a good investor for 75 years. That's not a little part. That's literally 99% of his success is just the duration that he's been doing this for. And so Warren Buffett's average annual returns now are something like 20% per year. Amazing. Really great. But if somebody earns 20% a year for 3 or 4 years, like not that big of a deal. Like cool, but you're not that big of a deal. If you earn 20% a year for 3/4 of a century, you're the richest man in the world. That's the takeaway.
Yeah, and I've often joked about, Warren Buffett accumulating that much wealth later on. Great. He now gets to enjoy all of this in his, 70s, 80s, and 90s, as opposed to I've always wondered, what he did to enjoy his hard work in his earlier years. But that aside, you look, and just kind of like a personal anecdote, I grew up in a town in South Florida. I grew up in Boca Raton, Florida, where there's clearly some affluence down there. And where I'm going with this is you look at the cars that are driving on the road. And I remember a time in my life where I would think, wow, there's a Ferrari, there's a Lamborghini or a nice Mercedes. And I would have to train myself to start to think, what did that person do to put themselves in a position to actually be able to drive that car, as opposed to like the more flippant thing like, oh, they come from money or it must be so nice. And it's just a mentality that I think a lot of people should adopt when they're thinking about growing wealth or achieving success, is that it takes time. Welcome the discomfort of those long games that you have to be playing. When I take on a project now and I say, man, this is really hard, that's how I more or less know that I'm going to find some success, assuming I can get through it and get to the end of the project, and almost train yourself to think like, oh, I can knock this out in an hour and it's going to be the best. It's probably not going to do what you think you're going to do on that.
I mean, one of the quotes from this book by Kevin Kelly, who we will be speaking with later, is I'm paraphrasing here, but it's like, if you think you want to be rich and famous, read the biography of any rich and famous person, and you'll change your mind. He says it more succinctly than that, but I think it's true, because I'll get back to what I said earlier. Like, you generally only see the finished product, or you only see the snippets, the highlight reel. You don't see the depths of despair that you go through for years or decades. Right. I recently listened to, there's a great podcast on Bill Simmons' podcast with Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. It's so good. And most of the podcast is talking about the downside of being a celebrity, which both of them are A-list celebrities, of course. Ben Affleck in particular has been hounded by the paparazzi for 25 years. And he talks about what that's done to his children and whatnot. And it's just so easy to look at someone and be like, that seems amazing. That life seems amazing. And you just don't see it's the iceberg. You don't see 90% of what's actually happening in these guys' lives. And when you actually get a full picture, you're like, actually, it doesn't look that great. I actually don't think that would be that much fun. And I think that's true for any level of business success, investing success, whatnot. Like, this is like a bold statement, I guess. But if you could go back and trade lives with Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or John D. Rockefeller, people who have been just like ridiculously successful, would you actually take that bet? I think most people, if you looked into it and got a full sense of what their life was and how much sacrifice they put in, and how many years of doubt and anxiety they have, how little time they spent with their children, go on down the list of I think most people, if you got a full view of their life, you would say, no, I would not make that trade.
Yeah, any, Fortune 10, Fortune 100 CEO, I often think about the sacrifice that they've made to their personal lives in order to get to that level of success. And I guess from where I'm sitting, I do want the fame and success and all that, but I don't know if I want it at that level where I have to give my life, to the public. And ironically, in pop culture news, you have Ben Affleck out there with, Jennifer Lopez, and he doesn't look great. He looks pretty grumpy and angry. Maybe that's just always the Ben Affleck meme there. But in any event, let's switch gears here. I think over the last 3-4 weeks, it's inescapable not to be able to talk about regional banks. They're having their moment right now when we think about retail traders who want to ride the volatility that's happening in kind of the banking sector here. We've had 3 failures in the last couple of months. And now bank stocks or regional bank stocks are trading like meme stocks. It's wild. I gotta say, I don't know if that's the sector of publicly traded companies we want, retail investors hawking like it's GameStop or AMC. But nonetheless, here we are. Morgan, what does this say about the state of affairs? Like, forget why SVB or First Republic Bank, a high concentration of uninsured depositors taking on big risky bets, right? Risky bets on 10-year treasury yields when things are low. Well, since when do you say treasury and risk in the same sentence? What's your make of all this when you think about, I guess people YOLOing in, OTE options on your regional banks across America?
I think if there is like some comparison between a regional bank, which is the most boring, stodgy, unexciting thing, and a meme stock. If there is a comparison between those two, it's that in both of these scenarios, the bank runs and the meme stock booms. It's the power of a million people on Twitter and Reddit who in their individual, like on their own, have no influence, no power.
No.
But when combined, when you get the herd mentality of their behavior, it can take down big banks. It can make tiny companies worth tens of billions of dollars. It's easy to underestimate the aggregate influence of a bunch of uninfluential people. And there've been studies that have come out just in the last week or so of if your bank is mentioned a certain level of times on Twitter, like look out, like you're in trouble. And I get that. I understand it. I won't tell you the name of the bank. It doesn't matter that much. But 2 or 3 weeks ago, someone posted on Twitter that this bank that I happen to bank with might be in trouble. And I spent 30 minutes thinking about, should I take my money out? Should I move it? And I consider myself a fairly unemotional person when it comes to finances. I'm not a panicker when it comes to finances. But I get it. I get why people have this. And I did not move my money, but I get why people see the name of their bank on Twitter and then within 30 seconds, they're moving their money. I get why it happens. And it's the same mentality. It's the same herd behavior that happens that will push a meme stock up by 300% for no reason, just in the other direction.
I'll see your bank being mentioned on Twitter and raise you a former customer of First Republic Bank whose bank did collapse. And it's interesting in that I remember my wife saying to me, well, we knew it was going to happen more or less. And she said, should we take our money out of our checking account here? And for, a financial professional here watching what happened with Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, and really there being very little disruption for banking customers to go get their deposits. I knew in the back of my mind, I know I didn't need to go pull my cash out, but you know what? There was that brief moment where I'm like, will this make my life easier if I just, transfer this out today, see what happens here? I'm with you all the way. And yes, I think it's mostly a statement. I mean, regional banks here are the target of the group mentality, the group think. It could have been any sector in trouble here. And I think you would have had the retail traders come out and do what they do now. Is I guess the point is, this is now normal. You can expect, when they're as you would say, when things get wild with any particular sector or time, you can expect retail traders aping in and out of positions and try of making, just like we spoke about in the last section, that quick buck. And yeah, chasing that fade is clearly the allure here. When you see retail investors, go target distressed sectors or companies and things like that. So
Doug, shifting gears, there's another quote from Taleb that I've always thought was really interesting. It's from his book, The Bed of Procrustes. And it's kind of a sad quote, but I think there's a lot of truth to it. He says, how interesting it is that more suicides are attributable to financial problems than terminal illnesses. It's like, it's true. And it's pretty alarming. It's pretty incredible when you think about it.
Wow.
Now there's a survey that came out last week from Bankrate that shows how much of people's anxiety and depression and mental health is linked to money issues. And it's along the same point. And I write something in the intro to my book that there are two things in life that apply to everybody, whether you like them or not, or whether you're interested in them or not. And it's health and money. It doesn't matter if you are interested in health or money or not, they are interested in you. And you can go through life without any interest in chemistry or meteorology or physics. You can know nothing about those things and have a great life. Mm-hmm. If you ignore health and money, it's very hard to have a great life. And so I understand when I see these surveys about how much anxiety goes into or is caused by money, especially because so much of people's definition of financial success is you need to have more money than the next guy. That's when you're winning, is when you have more than your coworkers, your neighbors. It's always been like that comparison game. Very similar to, I think, health, even for younger people, where like, what is the definition of health? It's like you look better than the person next to you. And so it's this endless one-upsmanship that it's a game that can never be won. And therefore, I think even if you live in a world where historically, by comparison, you are doing very well today financially. Your income, your net worth, like you're crushing it relative to your grandparents. If you are not seemingly keeping up with the Joneses, and I say seemingly because you might, but the Joneses Instagram reels look so much better than yours, and it looks like they're living a better life. The tendency for money to instigate mental illness, I think, has always been there, but it's probably an order of magnitude worse these days because of social media.
As a financial planner, my thoughts are clearly all over the place here, but I can't help but to think about number one, the lack of opportunity for there to be financial education and literacy, just at a very basic level, to set yourself up to have a more advanced conversation, primarily with yourself and your loved ones, who are probably the only ones that you should really care about when it comes to keeping up with anything or operating your financial life. I never enjoyed the answer that was, well, what are your goals with your money? And people say, oh, to have more of it, to make sick bank, bro. That's not a great goal. That's a goal that gets you nowhere. It's not quantifiable. And even if it is quantifiable, it doesn't really answer the question what it does for you. To get people in a position to sit down and think and be open and honest with themselves around what they really want, what their view of success, happiness, the use of their time. These are big, heady things to really, wrestle with. I have the luxury or privilege in my career of helping people figure out what their financial goals are and creating some kind of plan or map to get them there, ultimately setting them loose on, having to go do it. So I just shake my pom-poms at that point. But this is hard stuff. And we talk a lot about just the investment component, where you need to be disciplined, you need to be in control. And it doesn't matter if you're a passive investor, and it's even harder when you're an active investor. I think even harder than all of this stuff is knowing thyself and figuring out what you want. And if everyone could really, get in on that, maybe they wouldn't be looking at their friend's Instagram account, which is always through the lens of some kind of filter. They're literally filtering their lives into something that isn't even real. And here we are viewing that as some kind of reality that we need to benchmark ourselves against. Man, times were simpler before all of this, yet the keeping up with the Joneses mentality has persisted for an extraordinarily long time. And again, that focus to be able to say, this is what I want, and I'm going to now create a pathway to get there and stick with it, does lead ultimately to happiness and success, you would think. However, we just aren't equipped. We weren't given that knowledge. So, if you're listening to this podcast, you're now hopefully somewhat more equipped. You got Doug and Morgan here.
I think what's also sad about these things, it's always been like this and always will be. So it's not something that's like, oh, this needs to change. It's not going to change. But what's sad is how many financial problems are caused by, or financial anxiety is caused by, people who think that their net worth equals their self-worth effectively. And that I think a lot of it comes from this idea that showing off your money is like, that's all you have to show off because there's nothing else that you can be proud of in life, which I think it's kind of a sad way of looking at it. But for people who don't have, or are not even trying to like be proud of their family, their job, their career, their wisdom, their humor, their friendship, they're not proud of showing that off for whatever reason. Maybe it's some sort of like lack of self-confidence. So therefore showing off their money is, they feel like all they have to offer the world. That's why when I view these things, it makes me sad. I think there's a lot of people who equate their net worth to their self-worth one for one.
More than a lot. People's entire identities get tied to money, and the influences that create that identity exist before they're even aware of it, through their culture, through their upbringing, through who they became friends with as children. And then you're thrusted into adulthood, and you now are earning money, and you have to be the facilitator of money. And it's the universal language that apparently everyone can't speak the same way. And
I think that's the important thing, because how do you quantify wisdom? How do you quantify humor? You can't. But how do you quantify net worth? very, very precisely. So I can measure mine relative to yours, but how do I compare my wisdom or humor to yours or to anybody else's? You can't. And I think that's what makes the money game such an easy game, is that it is so easy to quantify the scorecard. Kevin, I'm so jazzed that you are here and to be getting to have this conversation. This book that you put together, true to its name, is excellent advice for living. You have put together something that is really marvelous. I read it on an airplane a couple of days ago, and one of my favorite things to do with any book, but I think it's the true mark of success. I read it cover to cover in one sitting. If you could do that with any book.
Wow.
Now, this is it. Your book is a unique format. I love the format.
Right.
And the background about this that you write about in the book is on your, I think it was your 68th birthday. You wrote 68 pieces of advice that you wish you knew earlier. The book is over 400 pieces of advice. I'm glad you did not make us wait until your 400th birthday to get all of them. You were kind enough to kind of speed up the process, but some of these are such gems. One question, I have some of my favorites that I want to dig into a little bit, but one question, are these things in general, are the bits of advice in this book, are they things that you have to remind yourself of, that when you write it, you're like, oh, that I need to that's true, and I need to remind myself of that? Or do you think that you are able to follow these bits of advice? They've really been internalized and you are living your life to them every day?
No, actually, I started writing them down to help me remind myself to remember them, to give them. But by making them a little tiny capsule, I made a little handle for them so I could hold them in my mind and repeat them to try to make a habit out of it. So these are things that I would generally be repeating to myself at some capacity in order to remind myself, because I think somebody once said, everything important has already been said, but nobody was listening, so we have to say it again. And that's basically what these are.
I think there's a quote, the wise have always said the same things, and fools have always done the same things. Kevin, I'm gonna jump into some of my favorites. I mean, of the 400, I think all 400 plus of them are great, but I want to jump into a few of my favorites here. One of them is, whenever you have a choice between being right or being kind, be kind. No exceptions. Don't confuse kindness with weakness. That last part, I think, was really interesting, that sometimes being kind feels like you're giving in a negotiation or whatever it might be. Say a little more about that.
Yeah. That's just my observation in the world. I've kind of concluded that what we're taught in school is wrong, that we're taught basically that the basic human default of behavior is to be selfish, is to be mine, to not cooperate. And actually, in my experience in the world and traveling both in the richest and the poorest places, those with hardship and those with privilege, is that the basic human default is actually kindness and trust of strangers and willingness to help, if you allow it. And so I think that you can put yourself more in alignment with the general good things of the world by being kind. It's kind of a curious thing that the most selfish thing that you can do is to be kind and give and be generous. It's really weird. It's a paradox.
Is there any examples of counters to that, where you look at very successful entrepreneurs and attribute at least some of their success to being bullheaded? Not that being bullheaded is the opposite of being kind, but I mean, is there any truth to that, of people who achieved mega success got there because they were not afraid to step on toes?
What I tried to do in the book is to encourage people to invent their own version of success. The problem with this challenge you just stated was mega success. They may have a lot of money, but their lives may not at all be enviable.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to confuse that. So the problem that we have is having this kind of idea of success is basically how much money you have. And having been around a lot of people with a lot of money, that's definitely not true at all. And so what you want to be doing is trying to make a definition of success that suits you and your talents and abilities. And when you do that, you're much more likely to be judging your success in a different way than just how much money you have.
One more that I want to chat about, and then I'll let Doug chime in. And there's some of these that probably don't or even can't be expanded upon because they're so profound on their own. But this one is one that stuck with me. If you don't smoke before the age of 25, you are unlikely to ever start. And if you do smoke before age 25, you are unlikely to ever quit. I think this is almost like the nature nurture phenomenon. And I think that there's some of this that it could also apply to money and saving and spending. I'm just curious, like where this came from, and if there's anything else to expand upon.
Well, a lot of this advice is channeling the ancients. It's ancient wisdom that's being repeated, and I'm trying to put in my own words. But this one was just based on my observation of life and being around people, and just noticing that this was something that was very hard to shake off either way. And so I'm sure there's probably could apply to other things too. Like I'm sure if you were taught to lie as a kid and before 25 and became kind of a normal habit, it'd probably be very hard to break later on. And it's the same thing if you were really inherently habitually honest before 25, you're probably likely to continue that. So the Jesuits had a great phrase, which was "Give me a boy before 12 and I'll shape the man." So there's this idea that the early years were very, very formative. And while people can change, it's an uphill battle to change some basic things, and particularly things like an addiction. So I think this goes again to the value and the role that education plays in civilization as a whole. And one of the reasons why we kind of want to rethink how we educate our young people and train them at home. And so I would pay attention a lot to the kind of habits children have, because they're going to be really hard to change.
I heard this quote from Munger recently on an interview where, and I'll preface this by saying I don't know if I agree with this fully, but I thought it was profound in its own right. He said, when teaching money to young people, they either get it instantly or never at all. And I thought
I don't know. That's probably not fair, because I think I become pretty wise with money, but I had no clue when I was a kid. I don't think, again, the time I grew up in the 60s, it's really hard to convey how impoverished we were with information and advice, and how isolated we really were to the influences of the world compared to kids growing up today. And my parents never talked about money, and the schools didn't talk about money, and nobody talked about money. It was like, and so so I think I wouldn't say you'll never, but I would definitely say you have a disadvantage if you aren't exposed to it early, is what I would say.
I take Charlie's point on that, and as a financial advisor and professional with two kids, I would like to disclose that for all the times that I've tried to teach my when she was 6 and now 7-year-old daughter about money and stocks, I get an eye roll. I get a, that's your thing, Dad. And I'm being very polite with what's actually said to me here. So I hope not. I hope that she will, over the next few years, take a little bit more liking and understanding. And we do that through like, hey, let's talk about chores and things you can do to earn money. See if that motivates you, and try and create games around there. Well, listen, while everyone is sharing their favorite parts of the book and pieces, I actually found mine on my favorite addiction, Twitter. I'm so happy it showed up there. It says, "Don't save the good china and fancy wine for the rare event. That may never happen. Instead, bring them out whenever you can." And I'm glad you said the fancy wine in there. I literally think about this every time someone buys me a gift, a nice bottle of liquor or wine. And
Uh-huh.
it's taken a while to get into that way of thinking, but I'm glad we have, because I get to drink not only nice wine and liquor more occasionally, but it brings out the need to celebrate things that are maybe more mundane, or things that don't always require there to be a big, hoopla around. So along that vein, Morgan and I are pulling out our favorite ones. This is a loaded question. Maybe your favorite. Let me ask you this straight up. What is your favorite in the entire book? It's like having to choose a favorite child
Yeah.
here. I know it's not fair.
Yeah. What's my favorite child? I actually do have a favorite child here in this case, and that is don't aim to be the best. Be the only. Aim to be the only. This is, this is true for individuals as well as companies, entrepreneurs making products, which is, if you're aiming for the best, that's a very narrow slot. There's only one that could possibly win. So it's very competitive. If you are aiming to be the only, that's a much better place, much more likely that you'll be able to succeed by inventing your own definition of success. And when you're doing that and you're there, being the things that you can only do and that few others find hard and you find easy, this is a place where there's very little competition by definition. And this is a very high bar. It's really tough. This is a lifelong assignment, so to speak. And it'll take most of your life, at least if you're normal like me, to even come close to it. And that's all you'll get. You'll never arrive. It's a direction rather than a destination, where you're kind of moving in this direction of trying to find what it is that you can do that few others can't, what it is that makes the best use of the talents and the unusual mix of abilities and experiences that you have. And the final thing I would say about this kind of agenda, this direction of moving toward being the only, is that weirdly, paradoxically, the only way to become your true self is that you can't do it by yourself. It takes everybody else in the world to help you become unique. It's like, okay, so you can't become your authentic true self by yourself. You need the feedback of family, friends, siblings, colleagues, clients, customers to help you see who you are and who you are becoming.
Kevin, both Doug and I are in our 30s, and it's scary, but also fun to think about how much more learning we have over the next 40 or 50 years. And so I'm curious, have you thought about if you did write this book in your 30s or 40s or 50s, how different it would have been? Like, do you know how much of this book you would have agreed with in your 30s?
I think I would have agreed with it, but it would have been kind of new. And the subtitle, which is Wisdom I Wished I'd Known Earlier, is absolutely true. There are lots of these things that I would have been in sympathy with and resonant with, but just hadn't heard and wished I had known or been told. And so I think, vibrationally, temperamentally, I would have been in sync with it, but I don't think I would have been capable of generating it. But if someone had told me that, I actually would have been thankful. There were things like understanding that, like prototyping things, prototyping your life instead of making plans, or just this idea of iterative work, of doing something great in iterative steps, meaning like you were going to create something and complete it all the way and then throw it away. Okay, like, which is what we call a first draft in writing a book. And if you're prototyping a piece of furniture, you make a piece all the way, assuming that you're going to just throw it away and do it again even better. The famous one, I think the best musicals, Hamilton, which was workshopped for decades, just again and again. That necessity of getting to something great by prototyping it along the way was something I really, really wished I'd known earlier. Because when I was young, the idea of like making something and finishing it and then like, okay, we're going to throw that away and start again, that seemed like it was just too much. That was just really didn't seem natural. But now I understand the importance of it, and I wished I had known that earlier.
There's a weird thing too, where I know you wish you knew this earlier, but there's also, I think, a truth that the reason you know it now is because you learned the hard way. because you didn't know it before. So there's a thing, and nothing is more persuasive than what you've experienced firsthand. So there's no better way to drill home this wisdom than doing it the wrong way and then getting your fingers burned.
Right. So I think what you're saying is, can this advice really do any good if you don't have the experience? And I think the answer is, I think it helps. I do think to hear it articulated, it's like when we do I do mushroom hunting for wild mushrooms, and they have something called the search image. And it's like you can be walking and you're surrounded by these wild mushrooms, but until you see the first one, you can't see all the others. It's very, very, very strange. But once you have it in your mind, then immediately you look around and say, oh, they're here, they're everywhere. And so I think that there's a kind of a search image idea of a lot of this advice, which is articulating and saying it will help you notice it when you have the experience or close to the experience. That articulation, I think, is that crystallization is very, very important. Again, it kind of gives you a little bit of a search image. And then when it happens, you have something to memorize, to hold on to remind yourself with.
There's a saying that I love. I have no idea who said this, but the saying is, people don't remember books, they remember sentences. And what I love about this is that this is a book of sentences. It's just a book of quotes, which makes it so much easier to remember these things in a way that I love.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
I hadn't thought about that.
The only other similar book to this that I can think of, I'm sure there's others, is Nassim Taleb's The Bed of Procrustes, where it's a book of aphorisms, basically. Did you get pushback from the publisher that said, no, this needs to be a longer narration?
No, not at all. In fact, I didn't know about the Taleb book, which I'll have to now investigate. But no, they got it immediately. Although I have to say one thing, which is, again, because I'm believing prototyping, I made several prototype versions of the book. And one of the things that I did was I had little doodles in about every fifth one. I had a little doodle, which the publishers did push back on. They said it was too homespun. And it's like, this whole thing is homespun. But in any case, the Italian edition will have them. But no, they didn't. I think they immediately got it, and more power to them for that. I got no pushback whatsoever. And most of my time in writing it was this condensing down. It was like, almost like poetry. Is there some way that I can make this even shorter? Is there some way I can make this even more pointed? Is there some way I can make this even more potent by reducing the number of words? And they were all for that. So we did work on that, and I'm really appreciative that they understood that.
Right.
So I'm getting a lot of optimistic vibes and just chatting here with you, and some of the quotes we've read from your book make me feel good. So I would be curious, I guess, two-part question. Why should we be optimistic about the future? And with all that is, bombarding us on a daily basis that is not optimistic, whether that's, the local news, commercials, politicians, I mean, we're inundated with this. What can we do to stay optimistic? Because, we're going into the weekend here. I want good vibes only.
Well, I think one of the ways to become more optimistic is two things. Is to become more familiar with the past history. History is one of the best sources for optimism that I know of, because if you really look at the data, if you really look at the evidence, if you're very, very fair about it, you have to acknowledge that progress has been real, and that the conditions for producing that progress we've seen are still present with us, and so likely to continue. The second way is to change your horizon, to elevate your horizon, to take a longer view. As soon as you begin to have a longer view, it's much better, much easier to be optimistic, because over the long view, even small, even fairly large setbacks and disasters can be overcome just by the fact that we have compounding accumulation of betterment. So we don't need very much. We only need a few percent compounded over time to actually, over the long term, make a difference. And that longer view will enable you to be as optimistic as you can. And the reason that we want to be as optimistic as we can is that the only way we can make a future that we want to live in, that works, that is good, is to have some vision of it beforehand. We can't do it accidentally, I don't believe. Nothing really good that I've seen built in the past, it was done inadvertently or accidentally. Somebody had a vision of that and believed that it could be done. And that belief in the could be done is a form of optimism. And that's the optimism that is required for us going forward. You have to believe that this vision of the future is possible. And then in retrospect, those are the people who actually make it happen. And so our entire civilization has been built by optimists. And so you want to do that in order to make the future that you want to live in.
That was Kevin Kelly, co-founder of Wired, author of bestseller book The Inevitable, and his brand new book titled Excellent Advice for a Living. I hope you'll all scoop up a copy of that. And that'll do it for this episode of Mind Your Money. If you enjoyed listening to this, be sure to tap the subscribe button so you can keep up with the latest shows. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.